are listening to the Devoted Dreamers podcast, and I'm your host, Merritt Ansa. I believe God has an unfolding plan for your life, a God-shaped dream just for you. But so much gets in the way, right? Fear, comparison, imposter syndrome. What if I mess this up? You are not alone in those feelings, and I'm so glad you're here for Season 8. Keep listening to gain some transformational tools that will help you release the lies so that you can freely show up in the world, offering your gifts, leaning on God in your weaknesses, and serving His kingdom with the dream He's given you. Hey dreamers, this is episode 187. And before we begin, I have a trigger warning and just wanted to let you know, if you are someone who has suffered loss, or you are currently grieving, especially a pregnancy loss, I wanted to just give you a heads up that that is the topic of today's episode. Our guest is Ashley Opliger. She and her husband have a story of loss that no one would write for themselves. I will, of course, allow her to share the details of that story because I want you to hear them straight from her. But by way of introduction, I will share a bit about her. She is the president and executive director of a nonprofit organization called Bridget's Cradles, which God inspired out of Ashley's own pain and loss. Now more than 5 years old, Bridget's Cradles serves hospitals in all 50 states and comforts more than 26,000 bereaved families every year. Ashley's dream is for women to find faith to embrace a beautiful broken life. As you know, and I'm sure maybe you've even experienced, a lot of our dreams are birthed out of hardship, loss, and lessons learned. And of course, this one is no different. But Ashley's story is absolutely one of redemption and God using suffering and pain for good. I hope you'll listen today not just to the story and the details within it, but also for the hope that Ashley shares and the reminders to, number one, not trust in your own wisdom. Number two, that we don't really need to worry about the outcomes of our dream. I'll say this is my biggest takeaway from today's episode. Number three, that God doesn't waste anything we go through. He is trustworthy and faithful. And number four, that our job is to serve Him through whatever small acts of obedience He calls us to. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's go to the interview now. Here is Ashley Opliger and her beautiful story of creating Bridget's Cradles from what God did in their lives. Hello, devoted dreamers. I have Ashley Opliger today, and she is here with us from the nonprofit that she founded in 2015, Bridget's Cradles. Ashley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Ashley, will you take us back to the part of your story where you began questioning how God could use probably the most difficult thing that's happened in your life for good? Tell us a little bit of your backstory and how He's used that in your life.
So my husband and I, we were married in 2014, and we, shortly after our wedding, we conceived and had a daughter on the way. And just, it started out as a normal, healthy pregnancy. Obviously being a first-time mom, wasn't thinking about the possibility of loss, and was just thinking about what nursery colors we were going to pick out and all of those happy things of welcoming a baby into your family. And it was around 13 weeks that I started experiencing heavy bleeding and was rushed to the emergency room and was told that I had what's called a subchorionic hemorrhage, which is when there's bleeding around the womb. And at that point, she still had a heartbeat. And they said, at this point, the best thing to do would be to go home and be on bed rest, take leave from work, and just try to rest and give your body that time to maybe heal the hemorrhage. And they said, there's about a 50% chance that you'll miscarry, but we're just going to hope for the best. And so both of our families were just praying so hard that, everything would heal and that she would grow full term and be healthy. And and everything. But during those, I ended up being on bed rest for 11 weeks. I ended up having her at 24 weeks, 5 days. And during those 11 weeks, every single time I would go to the doctor's office, we were just given more and more bad news that the hemorrhage was growing, that it was abrupting behind the placenta. Her growth was restricted, issues with the cord. I mean, there were so many things that we were told that were just so overwhelming and heartbreaking. And we were just really struggling with, God, how can this be your story for our daughter and for us? And truthfully, even though I was a follower of Christ and believed in Jesus my whole life, I just was really struggling with my faith during that time of questioning how a good God could allow me to possibly be enduring this, would possibly allow my daughter to be struggling inside my womb, and the potential that she would not be able to survive and to not, we wouldn't be able to raise her on earth. And so just all of those unanswered prayers and all of those doubts and questions, and obviously a lot of anxiety and fear about what was going to happen. And I remember one day because I was at home, by myself. My husband was going to work and I was just at home in bed. And I remember one day I got up to go to the bathroom, because that's really the only place I would get up and go to and change my pad. And I know that's kind of TMI, but that was my life. I was just believing so much every single day. And every time I'd just be like, how are you letting this happen to me? This is just so much physical suffering and so much worry for my daughter. And I remember standing up in my dark bedroom that just kind of felt like this prison for me. And I just said out loud, I said, nothing good will ever come from this. And it was almost like I needed to tell God, I can't even believe you're letting this happen. And I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but I was in such a dark and hopeless place of just feeling like, God, I don't understand this. And this is just about the worst thing a human can possibly go through. And I don't believe there could be anything good from this. And I tell that story because now, 6 years later, I'm just able to see God's faithfulness and how much good he has brought from her life and from her death and her going to be with Jesus in heaven, that I'm amazed to think that there was a time that I felt that way. And that's really given me perspective for anything I've walked through that seems dark and hopeless, that God is faithful and he is working behind the scenes at that moment. And even when we question and we doubt him and we can't see any light at the end of the tunnel, the tunnel is there, and he is always there, and we can trust him with our grief and our suffering. And so that was the beginning of my story, but obviously so much more has happened since then. But that was kind of the start for me of questioning God. And then slowly but surely over time, as I surrendered to him, my grief and my suffering, seeing him restore joy to my heart and comfort me through such a dark time and give me peace and just turn something that was so sad and difficult and heartbreaking into something beautiful.
Yeah. So tell us about the something beautiful. Tell us about Bridget's Cradles.
So the week before that she was born, which was October 22nd of 2014, I had been hospitalized again and was bleeding a lot and going through more complications. I started contracting and becoming dilated. And at that point, the doctors, and they actually brought in the NICU doctors, and they said, we don't really think your body's going to hold on much longer with how much you're bleeding and how, everything's happening. And so if she is born early, because she's measuring about 4 weeks behind where she should be, she's going to be too small to survive. And we don't have IVs that can fit into her tiny veins. And they're just kind of preparing us for these really grim prognoses and grim outcomes. And we obviously left that hospital visit just completely heartbroken and just praying and praying and praying, Lord, please, we just need a miracle, help my body stay pregnant, help her continue to grow. But really, we just felt so helpless. There's nothing that I could do to change anything except for pray. And so we just continued praying. And behind the scenes, my mom, who's an amazing grandma, And she's actually a postpartum nurse at that hospital, and she knits. And she went home and said, I'm going to make something for my granddaughter. She's going to be born early. I want to have a special little blanket for her. And that's what she set out to do, is make this little blanket. But once she made the blanket, she started thinking about swaddling a really small baby in this blanket. And she just called it a God moment, where God just said, you're going to knit the sides up and make it into this little cradle. And as simple as that sounds, it had not been done before. And that was just a seed that God planted in her heart of something she could do for her granddaughter. She had no idea at that moment what it would become, but it was just an act of love. And she actually packed it in her bag and was praying that we wouldn't need it. And she didn't tell me that she made it. She didn't want to worry me with, what those situations could be. And so the next week, when I did go into labor and my placenta completely abrupted, when I got to the hospital within 30 minutes, Bridget was born, and she was born already in heaven. She was with Jesus. Her heart wasn't beating. And just going through the chaos and just like the overwhelming grief of this is really happening, I immediately felt this feeling of peace, which it doesn't really make sense in that moment. But it was like this feeling of, okay, she's with you, God, now. And I know that she's in heaven, and I have this peace that I don't have to worry about her anymore because she's with you. And I think one of the parts that really led me to feel that peace was the cradle, because when they first handed her to us, they had her in this huge regular hospital blanket, and she was 13 ounces. So she was so small, but so perfect, and just completely formed, beautiful little girl. And we could barely see her in this blanket, and we could barely feel her. And so when my mom placed her in this little cradle that was made with such love, it just changed everything for us. And we could pick her up and kiss her and hold her close to our chest. And both of our families were there, and they all got to hold her. And truthfully, that the cradle just gave us so much peace and allowed us to love on her and be with her for those 24 hours that we had. And so as heartbreaking as that day was, and as sad, how much sadness we experienced and how many tears we cried, the dominant feeling that I felt that day was love, and just trying to soak up every single moment and trying to force my brain to like freeze these moments in time, because this was like my only time to love on my daughter flesh to flesh on this earth, on this current earth. Obviously I have the hope that I'll get to see her again in heaven and again on the new earth when Jesus comes back. But that was the start of how the cradle came to be. And then really from there, it's just been God doing, it's such an incredible story, and there's so much to it. But to summarize, the hospital reached out to my mom and just said, we don't have anything like this to hold these tiny babies that are born in the second trimester. We're putting them in washcloths. We're putting them in these large blankets. This is not honoring to these babies and to these families who want to spend this precious time with their babies and holding them and loving on them. So that's when my mom started making more for this local hospital. And I went home and was grieving so heavily and just crying so hard in her empty nursery and just crying out to God, like, I don't understand why you're letting this happen to me. And I don't understand why this is part of my story and part of Bridget's life story, that she has spent so little time on this earth, just only in my womb, and then went straight to be with you. But I do believe that you are who you say you are, and that you did defeat death, and that you did overcome the grave. And because I have that hope in Jesus, that you are who you say you are, and I have this salvation and this hope to see my daughter forever, I want to do anything that I can for you. Because like I told you, I had been walking with Jesus before, but I think it wasn't until this moment that my faith became so real to me. Because my flesh is in heaven with him, and I have gone through burying a child, and then my own mortality became real to me. And I just was like, I'm all in for you, God. And so that was the birth I think for me, of that surrendering of grief. And it wasn't like my grief was just gone. I mean, I was still so heartbroken and so sad. But that for me was the start for God to say, okay, I'm gonna turn this into good because you are surrendered and you're obedient to me. And from there, we just had some God opened doors where we had a national news media exposure, and hospitals across the country were saying, we need these too. And knitters and crocheters all over the country and even the world were saying, we want to help you do this. And quickly we realized there was a need for this, and families needed a special way to hold their babies. So we started the nonprofit that next year in 2015, and I resigned from my job as a speech pathologist, what I'd gone to get my bachelor's and master's for. I let my licensure go and said, okay, God, I'm all in. I'll do ministry full time. That's where my heart was. And from that moment till now, we are now donating these little cradles to over 1,000 hospitals in all 50 states.
That's just incredible. There's so many pieces of this, like this one, seemingly small thing, this choice that your mom made. And as you're telling the story, I'm like, it had to be part of the miracle too, that she knew what size to make it, because not very many people could, like, maybe because of her career experience, but like to know what how much Bridget was going to weigh, what size she was going to be when she was born, and for this piece to be such a beautiful comfort to you all. And then, I always want to remember the citation of that verse. Oh, there it is. It's so beautiful.
I know, I'm showing you, but this is just a little replica of her cradle because we had chosen to bury her in her original cradle that just gave us comfort inside her casket.
Yeah.
And so my mom had made this little one out of the exact same yarn so that I could have it with me. And a lot of families do choose to do that, either have their baby buried with the cradle or to have it to hold on to. Some moms will tell me that they sleep with their little cradle because it was the only thing their baby touched on earth. They didn't get to hold their baby in the blankets that they bought or put a onesie on them or, the little dresses or anything. And so this becomes that like a physical attachment. And, a lot of times they'll make little shadow boxes with their babies, little items that they had bought for them. And it's just so sweet.
And it just makes me think of that verse, that will comfort others with the comfort with which we have been comforted. You probably have that one memorized.
Yes, 2 Corinthians, I believe.
Yeah, I knew it was a Corinthians somewhere.
Yes, that's really our mission. And that's why we do what we do, is that God has comforted us and we want to comfort other people with that same comfort. And then hopefully then when they've been comforted, they'll want to comfort other people as well.
Sure. Yeah, no one goes into a pregnancy expecting this to be the outcome. And for such a tender, vulnerable moment in their lives, for you all to come around them. I mean, strangers, right? To these women these families that are receiving these cradles. And so I'm grateful for your story. I'm grateful that the Lord saw fit to, redeem it in this way. And so 6 years, and your nonprofit is thriving, and you have some other dreams, if there's any that you're willing to share.
Yeah, so many. I think 2020, just with COVID and so many things changing, we had to change a lot of our operations here at our headquarters because, normally we would gather all of our volunteers here at these big work nights every month and fill the room with people. And we can't do that anymore. It's not safe. And so we had to change our operations there and have our volunteers take things home to work on and bring back and just drive up to our building and exchange things. But then more so from our support group ministry, which is called Hope Gatherings, we were doing a lot of in-person events. We were doing a monthly Christ-centered support group in person where we did kind of the traditional support group, but also had the moms serve in the ministry, which was a really big healing part for them and for myself. And so giving them that opportunity to serve alongside other bereaved moms, to comfort other bereaved moms, that's just a huge part of healing. And so we were doing that. And then we also had these craft nights we called Create and Remember. And we would make like little things in memory of our babies and have some sort of business come in and teach us how to do like watercolor brush lettering or string art and jewelry making and ornament making and all these things in memory of our babies. And really that time was just focused on fellowship with other women and sitting side by side and linking arms and just sharing our hearts and our stories and our grief with each other. And so when COVID hit, so many of those things, we continued to do some of them in person, but we had to limit how many people could come in because we had to spread out in the room. And that really gave us the idea to try to share this message of hope more online. And we started Hope Gatherings Online, which is a support group every month on Zoom, and we're still doing that. So if you have any listeners, no matter where they are in the country or the world, they can find that information on our website, and we do that monthly. That's something that I lead, and we've now had women all across the country who've received Cradles that are, the hospitals that have joined us for these online support groups. And it's been a blessing to get to know more women and be able to comfort more families across the country in that regard. But recently I've been pursuing both wanting to start a podcast and writing a book, just really any way that I can share the message of the hope of heaven and through the gospel that God can restore our joy and use our grief for good, and that we do have this hope to see our babies again forever. That's the hope and the comfort that God has given me, and I want to give other people. So just sharing my story, my testimony, and what God's done through my life, but also through so many other women that I get to serve alongside. I have met so many bereaved moms that serve here in the ministry with me, and they've become my best friends. And we've all been just committed to sharing this message to the world and to people and to comfort people, because it truly is one of the most devastating, heartbreaking experiences a person and a mother can experience. And it's can be incredibly isolating and lonely, and you could feel misunderstood in your grief and unsupported. And like I did, question God and question how a good God could allow this. And there's so many feelings that you go through and so many emotions, and it's just can become very hopeless. And so really the mission is just any way that we can, whether it's through a cradle or through podcast or a written word online, we just want to share that hope with people who are suffering and going through this.
And this next question feels a little bit frivolous, but I know you have an answer to it. So what has been required of you to step forward in this that feels out of your comfort zone?
Yeah. So for me, I have just, and I think a lot of people, anytime you're a dreamer and you have all these dreams and visions that God places on your heart and everything, it's normal to have insecurities and fears. But I think I really struggle with this. And I think it's because the enemy knows how to use those insecurities against me and to try to thwart me from doing and being obedient to what God is asking me to do. And so definitely anytime that there's something big or some sort of breakthrough that Bridget's Cradles is about to do, or personally, there's always spiritual attacks that come with that, because Satan does not like what we're doing and what I'm sharing, and doesn't want people to find hope. He would much prefer that people stay bitter toward God and turn away from God in their grief and don't turn to him and question him and go to negative coping strategies to deal with their grief. And so Satan, I think bereaved mothers are very susceptible to hearing those lies being whispered to from the enemy. Because when you're grieving and you're heartbroken, you're weak and your walls are down. And I think it's so easy for Satan to whisper these lies or make you feel unworthy or unloved or rejected by God or abandoned by God, all of which we know is not true. And so I think for me, I've gone through all of those feelings of feeling, just fearing failure, fearing rejection, fearing that I'm not going to be good enough and I'm not adequate or equipped enough to do whatever it is that God's placed in my heart. And the truth is I'm not actually, I'm not equipped to do it, but God is teaching me. And, I was not in the nonprofit space before this. And now I'm leading this nonprofit and I'm learning still every single day, and I'll continue to learn. And it's because he teaches me and he puts people in my path to mentor me and to show me. And so I think when it comes to dreaming, it's just trusting not on your own strength and on your own wisdom and your own background or experience, although all of those things are obviously, God uses all of that. I mean, even my career with speech pathology and getting a master's in that, it seems very unrelated to what I do now, but I actually do believe that God used that to prepare me for this. And he doesn't waste any season or anything that we go through. But I will say it's just realizing I'm not doing this alone, that God is the one that's working and I'm just his servant. And I am just required to do the small acts of obedience every single day that he asks me to. And he will take care of the big vision. He will take care of getting the message of hope out because it's his message. It's not mine. So I guess that would be my answer to that question, is just trying to rely on him when you have these big dreams, that instead of thinking of it as this huge dream that you have to accomplish in your own right and in your own, abilities, it's God's dream, and he's gonna open doors and he's gonna take care of it. And all you have to do is be obedient and do it, even when you're scared or even when you doubt and question.
Yeah. And it does seem like there's so much freedom in just letting him have it and not having to have it all figured out. I mean, some things are nice to have figured out, but just to hand it over to him and say, okay, show me what to do next.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This ministry is not mine, it's God's, and he willed it into being. He planned Bridget's life before she came to be, before I came to be, before the beginning of time. I truly believe in his sovereignty. And so I just trust that he had this plan all along, and all that's required of me in this dream and in this role that I play in the ministry is just to be obedient and to follow him and try not to get too far ahead of him in my dreams and plans, and just discern what is from him and what he's asking me to do.
Is there anything that you wish you'd done differently in this whole process?
Wow, that's a good question. I think mostly just I wish I wouldn't have been so worried about the outcomes, starting it, you have this vision of what you think it's going to be or how you think you're going to do things or what you're going to need in order to be able to do it. And there's so many things that you're worried about, especially when you're starting this new and you've never done something like this before. But God has truly provided for us every step of the way. I mean, even just like going back just a year to 2020, like at the beginning of the year, when everything started happening with COVID, there were so many people saying like donations are going to be down at church for churches and for nonprofits. Like, brace yourself if you're a small nonprofit. Like, people are not going to give. They're not like, there's going to be so many nonprofits that shut down. I mean, we saw so many businesses close last year. And so there's this kind of like spirit of fear out in like the nonprofit space. And really, I mean, the whole world obviously was fearful. It was a very concerning, unprecedented time. And so I did have this question of like, oh my goodness, like what if our knitters and crocheters, they aren't able to go to the post office to mail off the cradles. And what if people stop giving and we can't pay for the cradles to be shipped to all these hospitals because we donate them completely for free. And so there are all those questions, but God completely provided. And 2020 was the year of our greatest giving since the beginning of the nonprofit. And so it's just one of those things. It's like not to worry because he does provide, and he has provided through so many seasons for us and gone above and beyond what we even thought. And so instead of worrying about it, it's like, actually God blessed it and brought in more. And it's just, yeah, he's just amazing. And I can't really explain it, but I think the worrying would be one thing, is just trusting the whole time. And I do trust him. It's just hard, when things come up where it's like, what's going on? How do we overcome this? If there's a spiritual attack, or the world's, going through this major crisis. Yeah. Like, how do we do things? But, the amazing thing is, not once since the pandemic started were we not able to send a hospital that requested cradles their box within a week. Like, we had to change how we did our operations and our logistics, but God provided and allowed us to continue meeting the needs, and honestly opened doors for us to love on families and to provide hope in ways we would have never expected. In October, we did this event, which we had, you have to just YouTube it because it was beyond anything we could have ever imagined pulling off. But we did a quarter mile light display for our annual Wave of Light event, which normally was a community candlelight vigil where families came together on October 15th, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. And we'd hold candles and we'd do these little water lanterns in a pond. And it was always a very special event, but it was not a huge commitment to plan. But this past year, because we couldn't gather in person and it wasn't safe to be gathering hundreds of people together, we decided to do a drive-through event. And we ended up having this quarter mile of 50,000 pink, blue, and white lights all shining for babies in heaven. And all the families could drive with their family in the car through this light display. And when they entered through, their baby's name was read over a speaker. And then they could have lights like sponsored for their baby. And we had these little signs with their names and a big sign at the end that said hope. And we gave them gifts as they came in and connected them to resources. And we would have never planned something like that or dreamed that big had it not been for COVID kind of pushing us there. And I think that's even just a testament to God using a difficult year like 2020 to bring about good and to continue to comfort people.
Mm-hmm. And just such a reminder that like his ways are so much bigger than ours. Like he can see the big picture and we're like down in the nitty gritty, like worrying about how we're going to do some little thing. And he's like, I've got it. It.
Yeah. Yes, if you watch the video, we had a drone videographer take this amazing aerial footage. It was dark and there's just this whole row of lights. And when I watched the video, even though I organized the event and had this team helping me, like I'm watching it and I'm like, did we really do that? Like, and yes, God did. And he organized people in our community to sponsor certain things and help us pay for some of the materials because it was a lot more expensive than we normally would be putting on. But God like completely provided for that event to be covered through sponsorships. And like I said, the giving this year. And he just provides when you are doubting him or whatever. It's like he knows your needs and he's going to provide it. This is his mission, because he does desire for people to know him and to be comforted through him. And so since this is his, like he's going to take care of it. And so that was a huge blessing for me to get to see something so beautiful come from such a difficult year and see how he can innovate and create opportunities even when the world seemed like so dark.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and doesn't that just kind of bolster you up for what's to come? Like maybe wipe away some of the worry that you might have otherwise.
Yeah. It definitely, as I walk with him through these things and I see, okay, I worried, but he provided. I worried, but he provided. Well, maybe I don't need to worry, And so I think that's spiritual maturity over time, is I'm realizing when I enter into new waters or difficulties or grief or pain, anything, I now have this history with him of just faithfulness that I can say, okay, even though I'm in the middle of it right now, I don't need necessarily to see the good that's coming yet, because I know he's always provided and he's always been faithful and he does redeem it. I just don't know when or how, but I know that he will. And so that definitely has shaped my maturity in Christ, and knowing that when I enter into new trials, which we all are, and will continue to until we go to heaven. He's told us that we're going to experience troubles on this earth, but take heart, he's overcome the world. And we have that hope and that faith to believe that he's going to be with us and walk through whatever life trials come our way.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, we definitely want to put that YouTube video in the show notes.
Yeah.
So I'll get a link from you about that. And will you tell us also, like, where can people find you? Like, what's the best place to learn about Bridget's Cradles?
Yeah, we have a website. It's called bridgetscradles.com. So that's where everything that you could imagine, volunteering opportunities, donating, resources for bereaved families. We have blogs and stories and memorial ideas and just grieving, healing resources. We have a whole page dedicated to how to care for a family member or a friend that's gone through loss. So if maybe you haven't experienced it, but you know someone who has, we have a list of ways that you can comfort them in their grief. And we also have information about hope gatherings. And so that would be like our online support groups. And all of that is on our website. You can sign up for our next one on there. And then we also have a Facebook and an Instagram page where we post about anything that's coming up or anything that's going on with the organization. And then I also have a personal website, which is just my name, ashleyOpliger.com, and an Instagram and a Facebook account as well under my name. And for that account, I share about grief and ministry and all of that, but I also share other aspects of my life, like motherhood and family and just all the things. So that is also there. And I have a little blog that I just started. So
you have a lot going on, and you have a baby coming.
Yes, I do. Next week.
Yeah. So by the time anyone's listening to this in February, you're going to.
Yes, I will have another little boy.
Goodness. Right. Because you had a boy after Bridget.
Yes.
And this is your third child.
Yes.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Can't wait
to
so
see
much.
Pictures of him and your sweet little family. I feel like I have a new friend.
I know, me too. I'm so glad I get to meet you.
Me too. Oh, and I love hearing your story, and thank you for just walking through what it takes to do something really maybe out of your comfort zone, totally, I'm sure, out of your imagination, and sharing what God's given you with families that really need it. It's a huge encouragement. And yeah, as we close, could you, just looking back to, a time when you had no idea this was God's plan, how would you say he has grown and changed you as you said yes and trusted him along the way?
Yeah, he's changed me so much. Like I mentioned, the spiritual maturity of growing in and trusting in his faithfulness through trials. But also I feel like the more that I've leaned on him and been obedient to what he's asked me to do, I feel more and more like I'm becoming who he made me to be and living out these dreams and these callings. Looking back even before Bridget and everything, there were things that he had placed in my heart and desires that I didn't even really have words for at the time. But it's almost as if God had planted this in my heart from the beginning, that I would end up in ministry and writing and sharing hope. And I just didn't know how that was going to come to be. And obviously I would have never predicted that this is the space that I would be in and the ministry that I'd be in. But I trust that God, knew exactly what he had planned for me. And as much as I wish that Bridget was here with me and I could love on her and raise her and have this beautiful little daughter in our family on earth, I do trust in his sovereignty that I will get to spend forever with her. And so I try to focus on the fact that, she really did live every single day that God had intended for her and has lived out her purpose. And I have that hope to see her again. And so I'm so thankful for him to walk me through this, because I do feel like he is molding me into who he made me to be. And there's so much freedom in that, and living out your calling and being obedient to him, that I'm not certain that I would have reached had I been walking my life before, having not gone through struggles and trials. It's just changed me to be a more compassionate person toward not just pregnancy loss and infant loss, which is obviously something that's very near and dear to my heart, but for anyone who's suffering any sort of grief, because now that I've been in the depths of that pain, anyone that's gone through any sort of loss or trauma or tragedy, I have this compassion for them because I know what it feels like to be there and to be suffering. And I don't think I would have been able to understand that had I not been through what I went through.
Thanks for listening today. Don't let the conversation end here. Let's connect over in the Devoted Dreamers Insiders group on Facebook. We're building a sweet community of dreamers, so no one has to walk this road alone. You can find the group at bit.ly/dreamergroup. I'll see you in there.